Gurdjieff was wrong about the emotions. It's quite shocking, isn't it, to contradict the great man? Or maybe I could be a little bit more compromising and say the popular interpretation of how Gurdjieff talked about the emotions is incorrect. But actually I think he was incorrect. And as I mentioned in other videos, I had conversations with people who knew Gurdjieff, and they just didn't follow everything he said, because he made mistakes. And if you look at the way Gurdjieff operated, he was effectively experimenting all the time, and everything that we now take as cast in concrete for Gurdjieff was probably just work in progress. I mean, in reality, a lot of what is happening now with Gurdjieff is similar to the formulation or the formation of religions, I imagine, just after Christ. And we already have the Gurdjieff Wars. We already have people squabbling about which is the correct version of Beelzebub's tales to read and so on, as if it mattered. And if you get involved with any groups, you'll find that they have a certain amount of animosity towards other groups. So, normal human behaviour, in other words. Poor man must be turning in his grave. Anyway, to get back to the main topic, what Gurdjieff said about the emotions. Now, if you've listened to the first podcast or video that I produced on this, then you'll understand the basic dynamics behind the emotions. Or if you're like me and you never do what you're supposed to do, then I'll do a quick recap. And the recap is this: the basic energy behind our emotions is our desire to survive. That's it. That's where you start. Every creature, including every man, unless they're insane or very, very depressed, wants to survive. Anything that enhances your survival will create a positive emotion. So, happiness, joy, those kind of things, celebration, just a good feeling. Anything that threatens your survival will create a negative emotion. And this, you really should listen to the previous video, because this gets all a bit involved. So let's talk about the negative emotions. By negative emotions, I'm assuming we mean things like hatred, envy, jealousy, derision, just the usual daily fare of human life. Just what we dish up on a daily basis. Now, the reality is that we don't experience these emotions out of nowhere. The reason we experience them is because something is being threatened. Some kind of territory or some kind of something that normally would affirm as is being threatened. So, let's take a silly example. You live next door to someone whose tree is growing over onto your side of the garden, and you start to get a bit pissed off about it. Well, why are you getting pissed off? Well, you're getting pissed off because this is an encroachment onto your territory. It is, in a sense, diminishing you. That little bit of land where the tree is hanging over somehow imposes upon you your neighbour's will. So anything which diminishes our power like that is going to create a negative emotion. It's law. It's not optional. It's law. It's what will always happen. So Gurdjieff's idea that we can live without the negative emotions is kind of wrong. That we can live without identifying with the negative emotions is more correct. Your negative emotions are always going to happen, to some extent anyway. Whether you identify with them is a wholly different matter. And, well, yeah, I'm trying to explain in 15 or 20 minutes what is the result of years of work, but as you start to understand the dynamics in the emotions, so they start to lose their power, oddly enough. So, if I give an example, let me think of something that would piss me off. Well, I've mentioned in another video, people who speak very loudly in restaurants typically used to annoy me a huge amount. Why? Well, because they're imposing their power in what is a shared environment with little regard for other people who might not want to hear all the crap they're coming out with about how wonderful their kids are, or their new house, or whatever it is they're talking about. Because usually it's some kind of boasting if they're speaking in a loud voice. And they are very deliberately in one way, but probably quite unconsciously in another, trying to impose their power over those other people that might be in the restaurant. Today it doesn't bother me so much because I understand what's happening in all of that. The people who do that kind of thing are usually very inadequate people. They do it because they're empty inside. There's nothing in there. So because they feel inadequate, they have to big themselves up in some kind of way. You know, there's a strange sort of inversion in society. We look at what are supposedly the most powerful people, maybe politicians, business people, celebrities. Actually, they're the weakest people. They wouldn't have done all that stuff unless they had to try and validate themselves in some kind of way. And the strongest people are, very often just the guy who's cycling down the road whistling a tune, or I don't want to romanticize it, but people who feel no real need to overtly impose themselves on others or to try and get approval from others are usually much more full inside themselves. They don't need to get some kind of external approval. Anyway, to go back to the main topic and why Gurdjieff was wrong on the emotions. It feels like a blasphemy saying that. I've had so much Gurdjieff indoctrination that it does feel blasphemous talking against something he said. But I know for a fact that the people who were near to him just didn't, take all the crap that he used to dish out. Where was I? Yeah, so the negative emotions are necessary. They're not optional. How much you buy into them? Well, with training, you can basically almost ignore them to some extent. And as I've mentioned, the more you understand how these dynamics work, then the more or the less power these things have over you. But, and this is a very serious point, do not try and inhibit or deny your emotions. Feel them. Get into them. If someone's pissing you off, observe, and don't sort of try to deny what you're feeling. Get into it. Put your attention on it, and observe as you're putting your attention on it. is the way to deal with emotions. Emotions are effectively a barometer for what is happening in your mind. Just in the same way that physical pain or pleasure is a measure of what's happening in your body. And to try and pretend that when you have an emotion that is painful, i.e. negative, hatred is a painful emotion, then that is not happening, is to do violence to yourself. And the only outcome from all of that would probably be some kind of mental illness or insanity. It doesn't mean that we have to fully indulge every emotion that passes through our being. We literally just have to look at it, put our attention on it, and give it its time. It's telling us something. So, in the restaurant example, what my emotion is telling me, from this guy who's talking about how great his life is and shouting so that everybody can hear, what my emotions used to tell me was, this guy's trying to piss all over everybody in this restaurant. He just thinks he's great. And that says to me, and then I can work with that, and I can say, well, he's only doing that because he feels like that actually he's a total nullity, and unless he does that, then he has no value. There's a huge amount of material around all this in Spinoza. Literally probably about, 100 or 200 pages that deal with all of the emotions. And this distinguishing between positive and negative emotions is a bit artificial in truth. So, an example. You look at your lottery ticket that you purchased yesterday, and lo and behold, you've got the numbers. So what's going to happen to you? You're not going to think about anything, are you? You're going to go dancing around the room. You're going to phone everybody that you think you should phone. You're going to be totally consumed by what you perceive to be a life-changing event. Of course, it doesn't change anything. It changes your external circumstances, but inwardly it's probably actually going to be quite damaging. But anyway, so that's the way you behave. Now, in actual fact, the correct word for all of these emotions, from hatred through to wild celebration of that nature, is that these things are passions. They are passivities. They are things that happen to us. And when we are under the control of something that is happening to us, then we are not in control, obviously. So with the example of the lottery ticket, if 10 minutes later you look at the ticket again and you suddenly realize you've misread the numbers, what's going to happen? You're going to be so depressed. You're going to be ready to just drive off over the edge of a cliff. And yet you've lost nothing. Again, this is a passion. These things are passions, and the whole thing is driven by our need to survive. That's the basic energy of the whole thing. All creatures have this need to survive, and if they are in better circumstances for survival, they feel happy and have what we call positive emotions, but they're not. They are passions. And when we are in circumstances where our survival feels less certain, then we have what are called negative emotions: fear, hatred, all kinds of emotional pain. So actually the positive, what we call positive emotions and negative emotions, are just passions, full stop. They're both damaging in their own way. And the aim of a great deal of work is to become less affected by those passions. Because if you're being affected by passions all the time, you can hardly be contented, can you? Because, okay, you might sit down one day and think, yeah, oh, this is nice, the birds are singing and the sun's shining and you've just got a new partner and everything is sweet and so on and so forth. And that kind of contentment isn't really contentment. It's too dependent on external circumstances. Because, later that day you may find that you've lost your job or something. Just life stuff. Are you going to be contented then? Well, no. In fact, one of the, there's an awful lot in Christianity, but the way that Jesus Christ has been portrayed as some sort of doughy-eyed, I don't know, mother substitute is quite tragic, really. And I think it's in John where he says, unless a man hates his life, he cannot be reborn. Something to that effect. Of course, Christians just sort of conveniently skip over things like that. But that's a very, very deep saying. Anyway, I'm not going to go into it now. But the bottom line is, unless you, as Rudyard Kipling says, unless you see success and failure both as imposters, or positive emotions and negative emotions, both as imposters, then you can never be content. Anyway, to summarize, Gurdjieff's view of the emotions is deeply flawed, in my opinion. Not only deeply flawed, but very dangerous. It leads many people, and I've certainly been there, to feel that they somehow have to censor their emotions. You cannot censor your emotions. Your emotions are a direct response to your environment, to the way your mind is perceiving its environment. So you cannot censor them, and you should not censor them. Whether you identify with them is a wholly different matter. But our emotional nature is driven by our desire to survive. That is the driver of the whole thing. And that is both a useful thing and a very cruel thing. But again, topic for another video. Anyway, enough said.